Hello and welcome back to Eorzea Armoire, a series about the background of some of Heideland's more epic and dense weapons, armor, and artifacts. We'll be investigating the lore of these items both within Final Fantasy XIV and the Final Fantasy franchise in general, as well as the amazing and sometimes obscure real-world people, events, and artifacts upon which they are based. The nature of stars is something of a mystery to the denizens of Heideland, even to those of us that have on occasion been able to manipulate them. I was hoping to ask an astrologian on the subject, but the Ishgardians remain tight-lipped for now, and I suspect that the precise ontology of these celestial bodies remains enigmatic even to them. We refer to the unaspected substance of which they are made as dark matter, and given that the astrologians draw much of their own magics from the stars, it is at least clear that it is a substance extraordinarily dense in ether. It was well before the estimated establishment of Ishgardian astrology, however, that a certain mage affixed her gaze to the stars with a rather more maniacal intent. There are characters in Final Fantasy XIV like Cid whose namesakes come from previous iterations without anyone assuming that they are the very same person. However, we do have a precedent for the notorious potato witch Shantoto, stepping into Heideland for a casual interdimensional field trip, and known as she is to care little for extravagant disguises, it seems that she made a productive foray into Eorzea during the 5th Astral Era, gaining a reputation for destructive magics whilst losing only an N from her name. According to Geralt, it was a fit of boredom that led her to experiment with the ancient Allegan meteor spell, although she had the good sense to only pull down a star rather than a larger body like Dalamut. It is accepted that Shatoto sundered this fallen star and crafted from it a number of relics for her followers known as Stardust rods that proved instruments of unprecedented effect in channeling thaumaturgical magics. Given that we know this era to have been host to the War of the Magi and that black magic was founded or refounded in Thanalan during this time, it is safe to assume that Shatoto lived among the Lalafels of Beladaya, or Proto-Beladaya as it may have been at this time, and it may well be due to her interference that this civilization appeared to survive the 6th Umbral Calamity intact, whilst both Nim and Amdapor did not. The Stardust Rod is a long-term Square Enix staple, appearing as early as Final Fantasy II. Although there is no literal real-world referent for the Stardust Rod, superstitions and ceremonies that we would refer to as black magic were commonplace in the ancient world, as was the practice of crafting ritual artifacts from fallen meteorites. Each of the civilizations that produced these artifacts had observed meteoric impacts and believed, as they almost invariably did, the heavens to be a realm of gods. These objects were projected to have incredible magical properties in much the same way as they do in Eorzea. Given the spectacle of a meteorite impact and that most of these masses were composed of a purely iron-nickel alloy with amazing patterns formed over billions of years of cooling in deep space, and that they were being discovered by many civilizations well before they had the capacity to mine for iron, it is of little surprise that they made such a spiritual impact. The Canyon Diablo meteorite that struck Arizona 50,000 years ago was worshipped by several Native American tribes, and fragments of it that were traded between tribes can be found throughout the United States and Mexico. The Winona and Willamette meteorites were also venerated in a similar way. The Oregon Clackamas tribe used to soak their arrows and spears in the waters that collected in the cavities of the latter, believing it would imbue their weapons with powers that would assure success in hunting. The Gibeon meteorites in Namibia were used by the ancient Nama people to make tools and weapons. Some historians believe that the Palladium of Troy, the Syrian stone of Elagabalus, the Hadshah el-Aswad, and the stone thrown to earth by Kronos around which the Temple of Apollo at Delphi was built were all meteorites, but none of these were evidently used in weapon forging. The cults of ancient Egypt believed firmly in magical practice, particularly believing through most dynasties that the pharaohs had been endowed with magical powers by the gods, and archaeologists have discovered several artifacts made from meteoric iron which were used in supposed magical practice, including a dagger found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Many Javanese and Malay kris were made from meteoric iron, which gave them a Pamor or Nicholas pattern, which was supposed to give them particularly potent magical properties. This substance was also believed to allow the kris to constitute a particularly deep and sturdy vessel for good or evil souls, and when imbued, would not only take on mystical powers but a kind of life of their own. Yes, like a zodiac weapon. They would even communicate with the owner through dreams. Whilst many ancient cultures were using daggers to make sacrifices, the Javanese were making sacrifices to their daggers. Bon, Vedic, and Buddhist Tibetans and Indians had a similar kind of ceremonial dagger called the purba or killa, shaped like a three-edged peg with an ornate handle and hilt. For Tibetan Buddhism, the killa in use is imbued with the wrathful spirit of Vajrakilaya, which would destroy negative sentiments and was therefore used less as a weapon and more as a tool for noumenal adjustment and healing. Killa that were made from meteoric iron were also supposed to be particularly potent. The permeation of meteoric weaponsmithing and its transcendent properties throughout such geographically and culturally diverse traditions leaves absolutely zero surprise that it has found its way into fantasy literature. The dark elf Eol, an Eldar in Tolkien's universe, forged blades from meteoric iron including Anguirel and Anglakel, later named Gurthang and used by Turin to kill Glaurung, the father of dragons. This latter sword was observed to be sentient and possess some kind of personality, even speaking to Turin at length when he asks whether it would make his suicide swift. I know there is also a sword in Game of Thrones that was supposedly forged from a falling star, and although that is obviously of the same origins, I'm quite determined not to talk at all about Game of Thrones. Even Terry Pratchett forged himself a sword from meteoric iron when he was knighted, and often despaired that he was not allowed to carry it around in public. So in both mythology and literature, relics of meteoric composition have not only a great magical capacity, but a kind of spirit and soul. Evidence that they have inspired not only the Stardust rod, but the central concept for the Zodiac weapons themselves. There's probably 1,000 more things that could be said about the connections between meteoric iron and magical artifacts from civilizations all over the world throughout history, but in the interest of keeping this series consistently digestible, I'll have to leave this topic having just whet your appetite, but if you find this subject interesting, I would definitely encourage you to do some reading of your own, leave some thoughts below, or ask in the comments and I can direct you to some further literature. But please like and sub if you're enjoying this series, message me with any requests, follow me at Twitter, at EthysFFXIV, but for now, have a great week, and I will see you in the next installment of the Eorzea Armoire.